I'll just jump right into it. See, my slides are not advancing, so there we go. Make sure. Okay, yeah. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to point to the SharePoint site that was just mentioned. This is it. If you want to look at where we were as of October, there's a recording of a presentation that was given at Pisces last October. It pretty much goes over Aquaculture Steering Group, different expert groups, and what things are progressing. So that's a good place to get some background. But I also, and it looks like this, working towards an ecosystem approach to North Atlantic marine aquaculture. I believe the title is something like ICES Aquaculture 2019. And then I also want to welcome you to the first ICES Aquaculture Steering Group webinar. This is going to be a series, and I'm so excited about that. I apologize that it's taken us a long time to get here, but better late than never. In May, next month, the working group on pathology and diseases of marine organisms will present. Ryan is going to talk about that group's activities and a consideration of increasing the importance of grassroots pathology networking. In June, the working group on environmental carrying capacity of aquaculture, Carrie and Jeff will talk about their group updates and plan forward. In July, Janet Whaley is going to give us a talk, and this title is a placeholder for now, but something on ICES advice using the One Health example. And then in August, we are going to go on a vacation, or it's open if other people would like to suggest a guest speaker or a new group or some ideas, or maybe we'll just have a steering group meeting that month. Although I know that's a big vacation month, and hopefully we all will be on vacation during that month. And then September is the annual science conference in Copenhagen. We're still hopeful that that will occur as planned, and there is a session on aquaculture health management, moving the needle from science to advice that Janet and Ryan put together. And I think you'll see where this is going, and the themes of kind of this next year is really taking stock of the science we're doing and looking at how that can be made useful to our clients, the people that we serve, governments, the regulatory people, and the international organizations. And this first 6 months will give us a great start on some of those areas we want to work on. So I think it'll be a really good program. After that, in October, we changed gears a little bit. The working group on scenario planning in aquaculture. Ben is going to talk about Mind the Gap, meeting national seafood targets for ICES member countries. This is based on a paper that hopefully will be coming out soon. I'm not going to give you a spoiler alert on that, but that's a really exciting paper. November is Genetics Month, production of scientific advice by the working group on applied genetics for fisheries and aquaculture. Jan is going to take that month. December, we'll have the final status report for the working group on environmental interactions of aquaculture. Tadia will provide that, and then also the next working group to follow on that, which is going to focus on risk assessment of aquaculture, at least tentatively. That's where we think that's going. I think I'll talk a little bit more about that. January is an open month again. We could, again, fill it in with a guest speaker or something else. February is social month, in keeping with Valentine's Day. Working group on social and economic dimensions in aquaculture will present there, Geisha and Cornelia. And then March, we move offshore. Bila will talk about something, and we're not exactly sure what yet, on aquaculture and exposed environments. And that's from the working group on open ocean aquaculture. April and May, still to be determined. And then finally, I wanted to let folks know that in June, I term limit. So we will be looking for a new aquaculture science group chair. And I'm certainly sad about that, but I think it's a great opportunity. new ideas, fresh leadership, and whatever I can do to support that person, that'd be great. So if folks are interested or people have ideas, it's not too early to start thinking. So we don't have a mission and vision statement for this group yet. Probably, that would be a great project for it to take on, but I did want to sit down and just kind of throw something out there to kind of provide focus. And this is my first shot at it, just as a, something to think about. But I would say if we did have a mission and vision statement, it would be something like this. It would be that the IC's aquaculture portfolio, and by portfolio, I mean everything we do from the working groups to our research products, to our advice products, to, these webinars, everything that is aquaculture at ICES, it really seeks to serve the regulatory policy and industry and other stakeholder communities by enabling, and I think this is the key here, is objective, consistent, informed decision making based upon defensible, high quality scientific information, models, and other tools. So what we really want to become, and I think we are, is really customer focused in our science. We are all about getting science used for the betterment of society, and I think we're really getting there. Over the last several years, I think we've laid that foundation, but now it's time to really turn some of that science into things that our governments and non-government organizations need. So we have adopted this as a bit of our framework, this ecosystem-based aquaculture approach. And just to remind folks of that, there's really 4 components to it. One is it's geographically specific, so we really are focusing in on a space. It attempts to do to improve the ecosystem in terms of its resiliency and sustainability. So we really are about the future ocean we want, not necessarily the ocean we have, and the future seafood supply we want, not really necessarily stuck with the seafood supply that we have. It recognizes all these different components of the ecosystem, or different ecosystems, if you will, being physical, being biological, the economic, and the social. And I would say that the economic and social really are the drivers, and I think we need to flip this on upside down and really recognize that it's economic and social interactions that we can manipulate. We don't have a lot of ability to do much about the physical and biological interactions. We just need to know about them. And then finally, this last point, and I think it's a point that never gets addressed in any of these ecosystem approaches, whether it's fisheries or aquaculture, and it's how do we choose? How do we do a trade-off? How do we optimize benefits when there's a bunch of different societal goals? And I really think that that's an area that we need to focus on. And if I were to turn this upside down, I would say that our approach to aquaculture is a method to find the optimal mix of aquaculture and non-aquaculture activities for a chunk of ocean that considers and takes into account the interactions physically, biologically, economically, and socially, and contributes to the resiliency of the system. So that's turning this upside down, I think, and we really kind of need to do that. We need to really focus on what we want in the end, and that is to make smart choices about how we use different pieces of the ocean. And it all of this flows back to the Sustainable Development Goals, even though we're talking about a region which is highly developed and highly industrialized. We still fall into these Sustainable Development Goals. We have places to go. We have ways that we need to develop, especially in the area of aquaculture, which is very undeveloped in the ICES region. So what am I going to talk? That's kind of all background and introduction. What I really want to talk about is what we're doing in terms of turning science into advice for aquaculture. And then I want to talk about laying the foundations in science for that advice. So this is an iterative process. We started the last 3 years really trying to get some science groups up and going, providing that foundation, and then looking at what advice products we could come from those. And now as we're looking at advice products, we want to look at what other science foundations need to be laid in order to provide those. And then finally, I'll end with a little bit about some of the ICES tools that are available to working groups that we might avail ourselves of in order to accomplish these goals. And just to point a little bit to the ICES science plan, we are definitely in there under the seafood production goal, and it's very specifically states that one of ICES' roles is to generate evidence and advice for management of aquaculture to help sustain safe and sufficient seafood supplies. So that's in there. So ICES Aquaculture Advice, what is it? And honestly, we don't know yet. What should it look like? Right now, it seems that there are three different tracks or three different products that you could think of. The first one is something called an aquaculture overview, and this goes as a book into ICES other products, which are fisheries overviews and ecosystem overviews. Another one is a viewpoint, which is unsolicited advice that we just think people should listen to. And then the last and really the heart of the ICES aquaculture, or the ICES advice side, is requested advice, where a government or a international organization comes to ICES and says, what should we do about managing a certain aspect of fisheries or aquaculture? And so those are the three kinds of products. The first two, unsolicited overviews and viewpoints, we can just do those. The third one is something that somebody comes and asks us for. And who are these people? They're national governments. They're the EU, not only DG Mari, but other DGs. I learned a couple months ago that there's, I think, 6 or 7 DGs in the EU system that have the word aquaculture somewhere in their goal statements. There's also multilateral international organizations like FAO, OIE, and others. And then I put industry in there as a question mark. Traditionally, industry and NGOs are not really clients of ICES. However, one could argue that it's in both their interests to have really, really good governance over aquaculture. Okay. Hope nobody sees. Okay. Getting some pop-ups on my screen here. All right, so let's just kind of go into these products a little bit deeper. What's an ICES overview? First of all, these are geographically based on ecoregions, or they could be on fisheries regions. These ecoregions don't necessarily line up nicely for aquaculture, so that's still open. But to give you an example of the two other products, which are overviews, ecosystem overviews provide a description of the ecosystems, identify the main human pressures, and explain how these affect key ecosystem components. Likewise, the fisheries overview summarize fishing activities at ICES ecoregions, including which countries are catching what species, the various fishing methods being used, and how stocks are managed. Aquaculture overviews provide, we don't know yet. So we are, going to be filling that out and, creating those outlines over the next year or so, and hopefully you all can add your input. One consideration is we could consider using the ecosystem approach to aquaculture as the guidance for those. We'll see. There's, I think, some interesting opportunities there. It also harkens back to something that scenario planning took a look at in terms of an atlas of aquaculture potential. Kind of some of those same concepts could come in. So this is, for example, an ecosystem overview, Icelandic waters. They're not very large. Bay of Biscayne fisheries overview. They're 10 pages, but they are based upon quite a bit of mature science underlying these very relatively short overviews. So what have we done so far? So we had an initial meeting at the annual science conference 2019 in Sweden. We formed a corner group, a number of us, set up a SharePoint, and we've had some periodic web meetings. So that's not really progress, that's really process. So to get to an approach, we're trying to do is ask the customer. And so what we did is we established an aquaculture stakeholders group, and this was national and international regulatory people to support us. This was based on invitations from ACOM and SciComm, and I think also a few from the Bureau and a few others. We surveyed them. We initiated a survey to solicit feedback on the potential contents of these overviews, and that survey officially closed on March 30th. And hopefully many of you saw that. I think it was, you would have seen some correspondence on that toward the end of last year. We are now in discussions also to identify the first region or ecoregion for the first overview. It appears that the Norwegian Sea may become that first region, whether that's the Norwegian Sea per se or a bit of the Norwegian Sea and a bit of the North Sea is still to be determined. And then plans coming up. We already last month had consultations with both ACOM and SciComm to obtain feedback. There wasn't a whole lot other than cheerleading, I think. They were pretty pleased with the way it was going. This month we'll finish the survey. And we'll take a look at what the feedback is on the intended contents and try to come up with an outline and come up with a scope. That will then lead to a workshop sometime in late 2020 or early 2021. And we'll try to identify a lead scientist to take that on, or a group of scientists. So that is where we are on overviews. Stay tuned and jump in and get involved if this is something interesting to you, or if you want to do a second region, or if you have interest in that. So what's a viewpoint? So a viewpoint is the second type of unsolicited advice that we can give, and it's really based on a topic. And there's only been one of them done. This is a relatively new product, and it was done on biofouling on vessels. As you can see, the output is here. It's only like 6 pages, but it's based upon really a bigger scientific work underlying it. So these are based on topics with potentially high importance to managers and society, and they go through the advice process, which is a second independent peer review process where our work product, the science product, would be handed over to another group with some members from the science group on that advice group, but more or less a different group to produce these relatively short pieces of advice. So in terms of ICE's viewpoints, we have one in the works, and this is coming from the workshop on emerging mollusk pathogens that was chaired by Janet and Ryan in, last summer sometime. They produced a report. There's also some other science that can be brought together for that. We are going, and in addition, other of the working groups have expressed interest in viewpoints, and I'm happy to discuss those if you have ideas. I did press pause on a lot of those just because I would like to see one come through and really, get the process articulated and understood, although there's no reason why we can't be doing more than one if there's interest in that. This will hopefully mature a little bit more at the annual science conference, as noted in the session that Janet and Ryan have planned. And also, we are lucky that Janet is doing a bit of a sabbatical this year from her work at NOAA, and part of that sabbatical hopefully will be on detail to ICES in the fall. So stay tuned. That's the ICES viewpoint. Hopefully, we'll have an aquaculture one on that, looking at oyster viruses in the near future. So now that we have those things, and then also trying to think about what governments will be requesting of us in terms of solicited advice, we need to kind of take stock of our science groups and think about that foundation, which really is where the information comes from for these products, and think about what kind of things they should be producing to feed into this process. And I think we need to start getting ready for increased solicited advice. They could come really at any time, and we're a very small group still. We're a small steering group. We don't have full coverage of all aspects of aquaculture, so I think it's time to really think about both what our TORs should be producing in terms of deliverables, as well as what other groups might be necessary. So what are these kind of things? First of all, what kind of tools can the aquaculture expert groups produce that could feed into this process? Certainly things like best management plans or codes of practice, all kinds of reviews and synthesis documents, benchmarking analysis where you line up the different countries on some aspect and see how we differ or see how common we are, so we can really target areas that we should be working on together. And working group on environmental interactions of aquaculture is finishing one this year, looking at the various environmental laws that govern the ICES region and different countries, which will be very, very valuable for targeting areas that we can focus advice on. Models and decision support tools of all types, be these epidemiological, be these genetic, be these social, economic models. Many, many different types of decision support tools can be envisioned. And then getting back to this last point on the ecosystem approach to aquaculture, how do we operationalize trade-off analysis, and how do we really understand what it means to optimize benefits from using a chunk of ocean? And I think this is really in three different currencies. It's not just economic, how do we get the most money from a certain activity, but it's also social. How do we bring the most social benefits by mixing that ocean use among different options? Also goes into the terrestrial side of aquaculture in terms of social license and those kind of things. And then environmentally, how do we do this in a way that enhances environmental resiliency of the ocean? So I think that there's a lot of work that could be done on that, and to really try to get a handle on how to do that. Our fisheries friends are not there yet either. They also are struggling with this. Certainly, marine spatial analysis. How do we look at that chunk of ocean and move the pieces around to really understand, what makes the most sense for a given region? This idea of an atlas of potential aquaculture production and economic impacts may be something we could roll into the aquaculture overview. Risk assessment, which I brought up before, I'm really excited about this. This is how a lot of the countries, specifically Canada and Norway, that I know about mostly, look at making decisions on science-based decisions on key aspects of an industry. And those two countries specifically have more developed aquaculture industries that are more sophisticated, I think, than most of us do. And so they're a little farther down the road. We really want to bring the ability to do risk assessment into ICES, and make sure that all countries are able to make that type of decision. And then I put data and monitoring down here. ICES has a lot of data products. Are there things that ICES should be doing, starting large time series that would be valuable for aquaculture? I think there are a few, but that probably needs a little fuller discussion. And then some of these tools obviously are going to need new working groups. So what are our working groups right now? Existing, I think if you viewed the previous webinar, you kind of know these guys by now. The pathology group, social and economic dimensions, genetics, scenario planning, or that forward-looking group, environmental interactions, which really takes a look at the environmental laws and how we regulate aquaculture. Ecological carrying capacity, which is really understanding those ecological interactions and how much in a space is possible while maintaining sustainability and resilience. And then this open ocean aquaculture, which is really our Brave New World group, going out there to understand whether these new massive structures that are going up various places in the Atlantic and the Pacific are going to make a lot of other seafood production obsolete, or are they still years away from being productive? But there's potential for new working groups, and here's the thing about new working groups is what I am looking for is a collection of TORs. In other words, what is it going to do to produce? What is it going to produce that is going to be useful as we try to manage aquaculture in the ICES region? And then I'm looking for a chair, and all of our chairs right now are dynamic, motivated people. They're the ones that are willing to go the extra mile because they just have that skill set and that fire and that passion. And so that's what I'm looking at in a chair. And I would not start a new working group without a person like that. But that can come from pretty much anywhere. So I'm looking to this group to think about where we need to go, to ask yourselves whether you're that person that could be, that leader for that group and really push that forward. And I'm just throwing some things out here on some potential ideas that I came up with that, I think that we might want to consider. First one is, do we need a group on implementation of an ecosystem approach to aquaculture? I think Tadia's group is the closest to this actually right now because it's coming from a background of environmental law. But it's also an overriding framework for the entire steering group. So I'm not sure whether it needs its own working group or whether it could be a crosscut or some integration of chairs of other groups or what. So, but I'm just brainstorming here. Climate change. There's two large EU products that are projects that are just now finishing up on climate change and fisheries and aquaculture. The Ceres project and the Climefish project. There's interest in this in the U.S. and Canada. It's a big ICES push to look at the climate change writ large. We don't currently have an aquaculture component to that, so I think there's definitely that is ripe to produce a group on that. Oceanography and modeling. Some of these tools, I mean, we do aquaculture in the ocean. It's our pond. So understanding the connectedness of different chunks of that ocean, what that means in terms of genetic interactions or disease interactions or growth, different aspects of aquaculture. I think there's room for that. Epidemiology, it seems like the Achilles heel and what limits aquaculture worldwide is diseases. We do have a pathology and disease group, and that's great. But I think this whole area of epidemiology is something that we could maybe work with also with oceanography and develop further. I think one only needs to look at our situation right now with the COVID virus to understand the value of good epidemiological models. They apply to humans, they apply to aquaculture just as well. And right now, honestly, in the ocean, that's in its infancy. How do we operationalize this economic and social trade-off analysis? I just want to bring that back up. I know a working group on SETA has some of this, have been thinking about this, but how do we really take that next step and that next plunge and make it something which governments can use? Aquaculture and marine spatial analysis, I think I brought that up again. I think that again goes back with really understanding the geography or the oceanography, the chunk of ocean that we're working in. And then I throw this one out here. How do we estimate aquaculture production? A lot of governments rely on FAO numbers, which come up through industry. They're always late. They're not necessarily always accurate. Can we come up with some other way to estimate more or less in real time production that is in the water and will likely come out later? Can we also use that then to look at impacts of climate change, look at impacts of weather, oceanography, so on and so forth, in a more real time. And I think my thinking on that right now is it involves using satellites somewhere in that. And the model I would use is right now in Europe, the satellite Copernicus goes across France and takes pictures of the fields of corn and the fields of wheat and can predict, more or less what the harvest is going to be at the end of the growing season. We don't have that in aquaculture, and I think that's something we could look at. Engineering, technical needs, others. I'm just throwing these out as suggestions, so take that as if it's useful to you. So some other tools that ICES does have. There are publications. There's 4 different peer review series. The cooperative research reports that some of you groups have used for good. These are good for reviews, for synthesis documents covering a broad range of topics. There's this other one called TIMES, Techniques in Marine Environmental Sciences, which is not very well used, but these are basically how-tos, protocols, procedure manuals, focusing on methodology. I could see, for example, producing a TIMES on a risk assessment, a guidance on how to conduct that, or some of these other things that we do. The leaflet series, the pathology group uses these quite a bit. They have quite a number of ID leaflets out. There's 2 series. There's one on plankton, which I don't see us using a lot, but certainly the one on diseases and parasites has been primarily an aquaculture product. Of course, the ICES Journal of Marine Sciences, it's a great outlet for your work. And then there's these popular things, the newsletters. I think I sent out an opportunity to put in an ICES Science Highlight, which is basically just more of a, this is what we do, and kind of a gee whiz type document to speak to the constituents of ICES, and of course press releases. And finally, I think an area that we will be wanting to use in the future are trainings. ICES does trainings, and if we think about empowering those people who need to make decisions about aquaculture, it really means educating them. So I could see, for example, just sticking with the example of risk assessment, a training on risk assessment, also a TIMES on risk assessment, and then this benchmarking or this best practices synthesis document on how different countries go about that and apply that to aquaculture. So I could see using these tools in multiple ways. Various different things we could do, scenario analysis. We could do many, many different things, and end up with trainings to try to really cement good decision making and good science-based approaches to decision making in the ICES regions. Communications and meetings. I would be remiss if I didn't say something about moving more to virtual meetings and less in person. We're not giving up on that, certainly, but we do want to make the best use of virtual meetings while we can. There are some advantages that we might as well take advantage of until we can meet again in person. There's this good enough crowdsourced guide to planning and running virtual meetings that was sent around in workgroup chairs. We can also have a link to that on the SharePoint site if people need it. This WebEx and SharePoint at ICES are tools. Other institutions have also tools that you may be having to use in your work groups. The only thing I would ask is remember to get a copy back on the ICES SharePoint of whatever final documents come out of them. And then we're certainly open to any other expressions of what you need or ideas you have to continue your work at this point in time. So with that, I will stop and allow time for some questions or discussion, comments, and go ahead and type those in the chat, and we'll take them. Thank you. All right, so I'll start reading them in here in the chat. Bobby says, Mike, can you provide an example of risk assessment used effectively, appropriately, or not in aquaculture, Canada or Norway? Thank you. Yeah, so I know that Norway's got one coming out, and I'm sure Tadia can speak to that, but the ones I'm more familiar with are in Canada, where, for example, they just finished a series of them looking at risk of diseases from farmed Atlantic salmon in British Columbia, and that potential impact on Fraser River wild salmon. Very well done. It's a very standard process. What I like about risk assessment is it carries a long history in legal and insurance type decision making. So it is something that the rest of the world knows about and can relate to. It looks like McKinsey. I'm not sure from this name who this is, but there is a link here in the chat. Many risk assessments on the various pathogens. Okay. Okay, what? Oh, Chris. Oh, it's Chris. Of course it is. Of course it is. Okay, I get it. Let's see. Where am I? From Tadia, from Norwegian Risk Assessment, he also sends a link. From Geisha, thank you, Mike. I wonder if one could open up times to marine science instead of marine environmental science methods. That absolutely. I would say that don't get hung up on the word environmental there. I think they just had that in there because it made the word times. I think it could be open up to anything. So that's all the questions in the chat. Oh, there's another one from Jan. IC's work group on applied genetics and fisheries and aquaculture held a training course. Very rewarding and successful. A lot of organizational work. Yeah, I know. And it sounds really like it was a great course. I was sorry to miss it. I actually was in Brussels at the time, but I had to go to other meetings. But it looked great. Other questions or comments? So I'm learning that you have to count to about 15 on webinars to have that pause to let people type into chat. But I don't think I see any more coming. So a recording of this will be at the SharePoint site, and I know a number of groups have their meetings in May, and I look forward to joining some of those remotely. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to everyone. Hope you have a great Easter, and I'll post everything on the ASG SharePoint site and also send out an email in the coming days. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.